Thank you very much, Holly. I really appreciate that great introduction. Welcome, everybody, to Asset Mapping. This is part 2 of 2. And this time, we're really going to take a look again at the community engaged asset mapping for adult education planning and continuous improvement by diving a little bit deeper into one of the samples we gave on our first webinar. Before I begin, I am going to do quick introductions for those of you who don't know us, but many of you do. I'm Lisa Lefevre. I'm a Senior Program Associate at WestEd, and I am joined by my colleagues today who are helping to facilitate. I am going to hand it over to both of them. Tran, just to say hello.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who are returning, welcome and thank you for returning. And for those of you who are new, we're happy to have you. My name is Tran Keys, and I'm a Senior Research Associate at WestEd.
Greg.
Hi, all. So great to see all of you. I am, of course, Greg Hill Jr. I'm also a Senior Research Associate at WestEd, where I focus on primarily adult ed, post-secondary, and applied data science and visualization. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I want to say a big thanks, but before I do, I want to give a big thanks to both Tran and Greg for everything they've been doing for these sessions. They've been giving wonderful support. They are part of a larger team who some of you also know and will be meeting throughout all our technical assistance. So at WestEd that we are providing field support, so please feel free to contact us as we go along. We also want to thank the Chancellor's Office for CAPE, Myra Diaz and Cora Rainey, and of course, CDE, Dr. Carolyn Zachary, Neil Kelly, and Diana Batista. I always give them a quick second to say hello, either here in the chat, so feel free.
Hello.
Hi, Neil. Always a pleasure. Thank you. All right. And then I think I will quickly also give a real hearty shout out to Holly and Mandalay, who always help us facilitate these sessions. Without them, we couldn't make this happen. So thank you so much to both. Now, I'm going to be talking about our goals. Some of you have seen these today. It's two-part series, so these goals kind of thread through. It's really kind of understanding the role of asset mapping in the way you can use it for your annual and 3-year planning process. We're looking at identifying the steps for conducting effective community engaged asset mapping. We went over those in the first series, but we'll do a quick repeat for this one. And then familiarizing yourself with approaches, resources, some of the tools that are out there, and then how you might analyze and visualize the asset mapping process. And finally, learning strategies that translate asset mapping into both action so that you can do this for 3-year planning, for annual planning, and continuous improvement. Our agenda, the welcome, which we're currently in. We're going to go over a little bit one question. Then we're going to take a look at what is participatory or community engaged asset mapping. That's a high level review. The first webinar, which eventually will be posted, we went over really the approach and some of the steps in more detail. Then we'll look at community engaged asset mapping in the 3-year planning, talk a little bit about the guidance that has been recently released and some resources found in that guidance. And then we'll take a look and choose one of the sample templates that we previously talked about in the first webinar. We'll walk through it, we'll reintroduce it this time and walk through it. And then we'll launch into discussions and questions. That said, we are looking for engagement, so we'll be opening. If you have a question, you can definitely put it into chat, but feel free to also come off mute, especially during discussion, and just make this an open, engaged time together. Now, we're not going to get into this question just yet, but we just want you to think about how can you see community asset mapping serving as a resource for your adult education programming and planning. So keep this in mind as we go through the session, because we're going to come back to this prompt at the end to really get your feedback. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tran.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. And, this is my bad. I should have asked for a poll, but you know what? This is a small group, so it'll be easy to do. I'd love to see who attended our session, our part 1 2 days ago. It will help me know how much to share out again. Oh, thank you so much. I did. Just thank you. Okay, and it's absolutely okay if you didn't, but please let me know. It would really help Greg, myself, and Lisa know kind of how much to repeat. And I always say repeating content is absolutely wonderful. I am not opposed to that at all. It helps us cement the learning. So we will definitely, you'll hear some same things, but it will help me know if how much depth I should go into. So please continue putting that in the chat, whether you did attend or you did not. Okay, Lisa, I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. So what is community asset mapping? 2 days ago, we talked about it. It's called different things, and it's really, to me, just the kind of just different terminology, but I like actually adding the community to asset mapping, which really all asset mapping should be community-based. That's what you get most out of. And so we say community asset mapping is a systematic process for identifying, for cataloging, and mapping the assets of a community. And I think a key word for me here is systematic, right? It's really getting it on paper in a structured way. And so that's why you see the word systematic. It is a process for assessing and mobilizing existing strengths while at the same time really building or strengthening relationships among the various groups or organizations within a particular community. And we said that very generally, and today will be specific to adult education, okay? Other names I mentioned, we say participatory asset mapping, or we just say asset mapping. But I like community asset mapping. It's something I really push for, so it's very informative to say it that way. Okay, so the next slide, we'll go into a little bit of a review about when we say asset mapping, a keyword is assets, right? What are assets? And we said that assets are things, okay? Things that are important to members of the community. So we have a list here, and I won't read it to you. You will have the slides. This is also from the first webinar, where we list what assets are, kind of categories for you to consider as you build as you work with your teams in building an asset map. Okay, so we bucket them in like individual assets, institutional assets, organizational assets. There are governmental, assets, which can be local, state, or federal, right? That's a key one for a lot of the work we do. Of course, physical and land assets. And finally, cultural assets. And I bet you if we had more time, we could sit here and come up with a few more buckets, and it might come out when we do our thinking together in the discussion section of adult education. But here are just some standard ones we want you to consider. Okay, so those are assets, stuff that are important to us in the community. And last time we went through like the who, what, when, where, and how of asset mapping. So I won't say everything again, but just to give you a sense of flavor for what it really is it's a strengths-based approach to community development, emphasizing on deepening and building relationships and identifying successes and opportunities. We often kind of contrast this with the deficits types of looking at data, right? Or when we talk about needs assessment, saying what are the needs of the community, which is really important to unearth as well. We just find that approaching the work in terms of initially talking about strengths helps with the process and helps with engagement of your community. The benefits includes identifying assets which are available, which can be used immediately, that have often been overlooked because there hasn't been kind of a comprehensive way of looking at it. And it really is a starting point for asking folks to make change, right? Is knowing what the current state is and what the assets are. It's very much a collaborative process because it has, when we talked about this last time, we talked about who are involved, right? We don't want to asset map on our own. We can start off maybe have good thinking because we all come with a lens, but a true, powerful organizational asset map really would involve multiple members of your organization. And also, quite frankly, partners, right? Especially in adult ed, that I know Greg and Lisa can talk a lot more about. You have a lot of partners, and so it's really important that they're a part of the asset mapping team as well, because you get to work on identifying your shared goals in the process. Again, because we come at it with different roles and responsibilities, that's what makes it for a really powerful asset map. You conduct the asset map when you need to identify, to mobilize, or build on assets. And finally, we talked about, people often ask, what's the best way of doing it? Is it, do I'll have to bring people together in a room? I would say from experience, in person is truly the most powerful. However, we have done it in all sorts of ways, in person for sure, virtually because of just the way we've had to do it. Unfortunately, right, with COVID and learning how to switch over to a virtual setting, it can be done quite powerfully. And finally, using a hybrid approach. And a hybrid just means a combination of folks of that, like a bigger group in a room together, because that's where they are, plus like a handful of colleagues who couldn't be in the room but want to and need to be engaged in the process. So that's the hybrid approach. That one is the most complex and complicated, because you have to manage both spaces, right? Completely doable. So if you'd like to learn more about that, just let us know. I will also say that last time we mentioned it's super critical to have a facilitator to help with the asset mapping conversation, which is kind of what we're going to do here with you later on in our webinar. And I say that, and as you do your own, I do not mean you need to have an external person necessarily. You absolutely can. That's what I do a lot with organizations, school districts, for example, particular offices in the district, like CTE or the English Learner Department, whatever it is, right? You don't need to do that. You can do that within your own organization, someone who has facilitation skills, who know what your goals are, but don't necessarily need to be the one talking about the sharing out what the assets are. They're just helping moving along the conversation. And we highly recommend that, because oftentimes what we'll see is we'll see someone within the team tagged as a facilitator, and then they just don't get to engage as much because they're having to be like splitting their brain, right? Facilitating, making sure it moves along. But really, they have a contribution to the conversation. So try to have it where it's someone else outside the group, right? So that's a little bit of an overview. I hope we captured that. Lisa, Greg, anything else I'm missing here that you want to stress from what we did in the first session?
I think it's great, Tran. One thing to just keep in mind that we stressed during the first session is this isn't, and you mentioned it, it's an iterative process. So it is a process. It does take time. It is not a one-stop shop and you're done. We really stress that it is, because of the community aspect, something, and the collaborative aspect, something that you do periodically, you come back to, you reflect on it. It might take actually days to complete, not all at once, but perhaps this becomes an event, or perhaps this becomes, something that if you only have a short amount of time to do it, you pick up the phone and you continue those conversations until you feel that, okay, now we have our map, if you will. So it's a process.
Thank you, Lisa. My bad. I'm so glad you brought that up. It truly is an iterative process. And you'll see that here. We'll do our best to come up with, got good thinking going on here, right? Later on, we'll dive into it, but it will not, absolutely not be the final product. And also, we know each of you have different contexts. So the things will come up together will feel maybe generic, but generic to adult education. So it's a great starting point. And then you move forward and make it your own for your own context. So thank you, Lisa, for reminding folks about how iterative it is. So next I'm going to throw this to Greg. Greg, if you can engage us and start us off with how we community engage asset mapping, and in keeping in mind the 3-year planning that folks have to engage in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tran and Lisa. So let's go to the next slide where we actually talk about the 3-year plan. So if you're here, you are unquestionably aware that this year you'll be putting together with your other consortium interest holders your next 3-year plan. And as part of the 3-year plan, you have to do a needs assessment. And this is one of the tools that you can use to help inform that. and so we've itemized a few of the opportunities that this 3-year plan affords relative to or this planning effort affords relative to asset mapping, and you can see them on screen. So it gives you an opportunity to sort of assess services, identify successes, needs, pinpoint defined strategies, and again, an asset mapping process can help to inform that. There is the link here at the bottom to the updated guidance. My understanding is that it hasn't changed dramatically from the previous 3-year plan cycle. But actually, and if Holly or somebody has that handy, I'm gonna, oop, I actually got it. Here we go, hold on. I say I'll put it in chat just in case folks want to have it open or make reference to it as we're going through. All right, so let's see here. Next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, I'm just grabbing my notes. Okay. Right. So as we were saying, the process encourages conducting that needs assessments, and that will of course include, you know, an evaluation of current levels and types of services, gaps, etc. And those of you who are involved in some of the early efforts will remember the levels and types aspect. And so what that actually means is like, well, who's providing, what kinds of programs are being provided, where, and by whom, and what is their level, meaning is it like sort of introductory English language learning? Is it more advanced? Is it, you know, short-term CTE that is, you know, a matter of weeks? Is it, you know, short-term CTE that is, you know, a year or so? And yeah, as you can see in the bottom here, needs assessment called for, which is section 2, can be informed by a process like this. And there are also some resources there that provide additional information on asset mapping. There's I think there's a link in there to a previous webinar put that delivered by, I think in 2018, delivered by Charisse Moore of AAR and a few other folks who you might recognize from your work in this area. All right, and then Lisa, I don't know if you want to put links to resources or we're at that point yet, but
We will definitely have the links at the end that we can put up. And I think right now we're going to get into the implementing the elements and walking through a sample. But I wanted to just pause and see if there was any questions before we get to that point. And then I'll switch over my screen. Any questions in the chat or come off mute, please do. Okay. Whoops. Let's do the steps and then I think Tran is doing this one and then I will move over.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Greg. So this also, if you attended last, I kept wanting to say last month, but it actually was just 2 days ago, right? We talked about steps for our community engaged asset mapping. And please do refer back to the first webinar when you're able to, because we do go deeper. But here's just kind of a list of like the different approaches, that there are different approaches to asset mapping that folks take. And here are just some general steps, right? Which is first, you have to define your community. Community can mean different things to different people, right? You have to kind of bound it so that when you do get together to asset map, everyone's on the same page as to what you are defining as your community. You wanted to define what you want to do with the information that you end up collecting to build your asset map. I say this because, you know, we often have this thing we say, and not just adult ed, just pretty much any area that I work in and I support, which is we engage in something and then we're finished and it doesn't get really shared out. So kind of, it's really important to talk about what it is that you will do when you collect the information. You want to select what assets you want to identify, right? Again, this is kind of bounding your work because you could keep going and go and keep going and going. And at some point you want to make sure you have a stopping point so that things are actionable. And number 4 is, and especially in a large organization, you actually want to know if has asset mapping been done. I chuckle here because I again work with large organizations where, you know, we say this a lot, right? Unfortunately, we often work in silos because everyone has different responsibilities, and really another adjacent office, adjacent group might have engaged in asset mapping, and you want to know that, right? If they have, you want to ask how they did it, if there's opportunities to build off of it, right? Collaborate. So it really is just a simple asking around of, hey, did we ever engage in this before? So that's another thing we recommend. Develop your data collection plan. So you're looking at the WestEd team, and we're a bunch of researchers, right? We're technical assistance providers and researchers. So we definitely engage in thinking about the plan, the data collection plan. We defined it asset mapping. Remember, the key word was systematic. Well, things can't be systematic unless you come up with an actual plan. And engaging in asset mapping can involve many different ways of collecting. So we often do interviews, right? One-on-one, sitting with folks, getting them to share. That's part of asset mapping, can be a part of asset mapping. Then there's focus groups, which is similar. However, now instead of one person interviewing one person, you're interviewing a group, right? A group of, I would say 5 to 10, for example, which is a nice size, small group where you get to throw out questions, and someone starts off and answers, and then you make sure everyone has a chance to chime in, agree or disagree. Such rich conversations come from focus groups, so highly recommend it. Then there's surveys. So another thing that I do quite a bit is I design surveys for folks. I help them. Usually it's code development because they know the content, I know the survey components, and so we work together to come up with survey questions, short survey that really captures the data that you want to capture. So that's another way to collect data. And absolutely, this is critical because it's called artifact review or document review. And it's something we engage in quite a bit. And it's mostly because folks have developed so many things that really are considered assets and they don't think about it. So we make it really general and say, share with us your artifacts, your documents, things you've used to do this work. And from that, we can often figure out how to categorize the assets. Okay, so just a few things for your data collection. And then the next, you collect data. You're collecting data, so you're developing the plan. Now you're collecting your data on your assets. 7, you map your organization, your community assets. Now, all the stuff above, now you're getting to the mapping part, right? And you see here in the bottom, I have a note that says outcome, a map, quote unquote map. I put that in quotes. A map of assets is produced, and what it is asset maps look quite different. It can look quite different. It can be truly what people think about maps, a geographic map, right? I know Greg can say a lot more about this with his expertise. There's sometimes, an asset chart or a graphic of what the assets are, or a simple list of assets. It really is dependent on what it is you're wanting out of it, what you're going to do with it, how you're going to share it out, right? It determines what the map looks like, the asset map looks like. And then I don't want to forget the last 2, which is number 8 is evaluate your process and your results of doing the asset map. Not just your results, also the process. And by process, we mean all the things you talked about above the number 8. It really should be documented. And I say this because Lisa mentioned this. It's an iterative process for asset mapping. At some point, your organization, your group will want to redo it. And no need to reinvent the wheel if you wrote down your process, right? You can tweak your process, you can make it better, continuous improvement. You don't want to start over again. That's the key here in terms of evaluating your process and also, of course, the results of your asset map. And then we don't create asset maps just to create asset maps, right? We're doing something with it. And so that's the number 9, is determining your next steps. What are your next steps now that you have this asset map? Okay. So those are some general guidance for engaging in asset mapping for your group, for your team. All right, Lisa, I think we're ready for the live. It's always scary to do the live thing, but Greg, Lisa, and I thought this would be most helpful for you, for us to help facilitate some conversations around this. So I'm gonna throw it to Greg to kind of just start us off. And like, Greg, how should we move forward with this? We have some ideas, and so.
You know, so I was thinking about this, and uh, I think probably the best thing to do is jump in and just go.
Yeah.
But I did want to add just a couple of considerations. So, some of the steps, Tran, you were sharing, or the steps, and they're absolutely spot on, of course. I think sometimes when we think about engaging in these 3-year planning processes, what we imagine is something like, okay, here's our group of people who are going to write this thing, and they're going to do these things, and that's how we're going to get it done. So it's a project, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, that is a thing that has to occur. But it is also a great opportunity, right, to build deeper relationships within the community, which will then further buttress the work that you plan to do and add nuance to that plan. And so it's really additive in a lot of ways. And what I really want to emphasize here is the beautiful thing about an asset mapping process is that not only are you sort of seeing sort of folks in the community or like community assets as something to be mined or sort of taken and aggregated, and sort of itemized, I guess. But this is also a really great opportunity to engage your students, for example,
Mhm.
in a process. So, take, for example, if you have students like, Tran mentioned a literal map. Well, if you've got students who are in like digital literacy courses,
Mhm.
or, are, developing some competency in those areas, you could teach them, right? Engage them as part of an assignment, where, actually engage them in this process to make like a Google map or something, right? You can also train them, right, to sort of go out into the world and their churches, their other community centers, and have them, identify people who they think actually, really represent the groups that they feel, that they belong in, and gather their input there. And so it also, so it's like, really, I would just encourage folks to think about about that inclusivity piece, right? If you treat it like a project, it'll be a project, right? If you treat it like an opportunity to grow, then it'll be a much more rewarding experience, I think. Anyway,
Greg, I have to echo that. That was beautifully said. It is an opportunity. And, something that I was thinking about listening to this, that opportunity to build relationships, and then the idea of a map, it is a living process. It is a living document. We've all experienced turnover in an institution or a team. You can always go back to this and say, here are the relationships that will help keep this going. Here are the processes we used, and then let's keep growing with it. So I really appreciate how you mentioned this as an opportunity. So I think what I'm going to do here is switch over and bring up so that everybody can see. Can you all see this? All right. I'll be on mute taking notes for y'all.
Yeah.
All right. So I think what we want to try to do is like sort of map this out, both a little bit generically, but I encourage all of you, be as specific as you like. But let's sort of hop in. So we've got a few buckets here, right? So associations, individuals, physical spaces, institutions, stories. And by the way, just echoing back, that stories piece, students can both be a source of that information, but they can also be the ones telling those stories.
Yeah.
Think about your, high school diploma students and sort of how that might factor in or you could incorporate that in the work that they're doing. And I would say the same thing for ESL students, where there's an opportunity there to make sure that the voices are really diverse and representative. But anyway, so let's go ahead and see if we can just throw some things out there.
Yeah, great. Could I just since, I mean, I just love that example you gave about the student success under stories. Lisa, let's add that. That's actually one that I think is just fantastic. I would call it something like student success stories, right, Greg? That's and then from the different groups you mentioned. I'm thinking back, Greg, when you said this, it totally brought back my time back when I was an administrator at a school district, K-12. And we actually asked folks students, adult, right? We partnered with county for adult ed, and there are some critical, like amazing stories that we weren't being systematic about it, unfortunately. It was more anecdotal, but can you imagine, Greg, if we had done that and made it systematic and then it's part of our asset map? So thank you. That's a fantastic one.
I think also you had mentioned interviews, focus groups. This is a place where those can fit in. If you want to reach out to us for ideas for any of these, please do. One idea that comes to mind is an approach called empathy interviews. It's a very specific approach that's been used, but it really looks at capturing the stories or experiences that people undergo. And this is particularly important for our adult ed populations. The variety of life successes that stem from overcoming life barriers are things to understand too.
Absolutely. And so I guess, since we're in the stories area, what other sources of information that might fall under that bucket can folks think of? And I say, go ahead and come off mute if you'd like, or you can put it in chat. Who else in your world has a story that is, the story to tell? Teachers. Thank you, Carl. I was thinking that. Teachers. Yep, teachers, yes. Other administrators, right?
Yes.
Who else might have a story to tell?
Greg, what about employers?
I was just going there.
You're gonna go.
I was totally gonna throw that out there.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Employers, right? So if you've got CTE programs, right, how valuable is it to talk with individuals who both who have needs and have employed your students, right? Social service programs. Thank you.
Excellent.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of these, by the way, there's gonna be some crossovers, right? State initiatives, goals, targets, and your role. Can you say more about that, Diana?
Well, what I'm thinking is that we're talking about student success, right? Maybe new strategies that teachers are trying, and maybe include, I'm not sure if it would fit in some other section, how you're working towards meeting those targets and goals, maybe with like the earnings and employee surveys at the end, or other, what are they called, measurable skill gains, something new that you're trying.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I think, going into a process like this, having, yeah, of course, that sort of context, that required context that helps shape those engagements is really important, right?
It could go in another square. I can't see the full template anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And so it's, the way that I would sort of factor that in myself would be, this is one of the reasons, for example, talking to employers, right? In particular, right? So what's the point of talking with them if one of the outcomes isn't transition, right? And so I think that's, yeah, absolutely. There is an aspect of that would undergird a process like this.
And one thing, just to piggyback off that, Diana, that comes to mind is oftentimes when there are initiatives and you're looking at, goals, successes, attainment, you're also looking at lessons learned. So I think it's wonderful if those lessons learned can be part of the stories too.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads to the success. And I'm sorry, I have a gardener in my ear and
That's okay.
Interrupting my train of thought. But let's say that you get a new refugee recruitment, whatever they're called, center in your area that's totally new that you haven't addressed before. You might want to put some of the steps in there of what you plan to do and who your new audience is, and then be able to follow and track it. I think if it's in the asset map, you're more likely to follow up.
Mhm.
Just that off the top of my head thought.
No, that's
Oh,
very thoughtful. And I see some great things folks are putting in chat. And I'm actually wondering if some of that we might consider um, uh, putting into some of the other buckets too.
yeah.
But we have social service programs, and I really like the sort of foster youth piece. I think that is a specific group that is well, it's yeah, I really like the focus there. Likewise, and suggests transition specialists, transition liaisons. I think that is great. In fact, those are two very good examples of roles that who can be in positions where they can have conversations with students, right? It's like I 100% engage them to and train them to gather some of this information. They are the ones engaging regularly with students, and they can speak knowledgeably themselves, but it's unlikely that those individuals have actually gone through a more structured process to gather information from students, and I would suspect it would be very enlightening for them as well. That's really good. Thank you, Anne. I'm actually what other actually so we've got a few of those folks. We have foster youth individuals, but DCFS under and great. It's not like it's thank you, Marianne. And it's going to be a little amorphous here, and I think you do both, right? It's the exercise is meant to clarify the directions to go, right? It's not no, and yeah, mutually exclusive is lovely for classification, but it's not necessary, right? Especially in the early stages.
Yeah, great. If I could share, if this might help folks, we mentioned like the different ways, settings for asset mapping. So if it was in person, Greg, one in any whether it's in person, virtual, or hybrid, we say at this point it's quantity. You want people to like share, and so I'm so appreciating all the share outs in the chat. And as Greg said, it's not at this point. It definitely is not mutually exclusive. You do that later on when you have enough right on your asset mapping. I say V1 version 1, right, Greg? So that's the goal here, is just to get you all to share out when you see these categories, what comes to mind. And then when there's a lot on there, if you were in person, I would give you little dots to go up and say, yes, yeah, you basically vote, right? In terms of if you're a large group. So please don't be shy about just throwing things out. Help us though in the chat. If you think it should go into a particular space, we'll put it there.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. So I think all of us kind of have consortium members. Absolutely.
Yes.
Very good. Yes. They are both a source for and a source and resource. That's good.
Yeah. And Greg, because Shannon said consortium members, I would actually put under association, I would put California Adult Ed Program, right? I would put that because that is a key organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yes.
And actually I might add here, there are it feels like dozens of consortia, right? Every initiative is a consortium initiative,
Yes.
right? So you've got your larger strong workforce, you've got K-16, because all of those, endeavors, right, feed in different ways to the work that you're doing. Yes, absolutely. Workforce development boards. Yeah, I see that.
Excellent.
AJCCs. So these are, in a lot of ways, what we're hearing here, and I love that, James. What we're grabbing. These are some of the communities and the organizations that that often you are engaged with on a semi-regular basis. But obviously we're adding some nuance here. I'm actually really curious, if Lisa, if you could scroll up just a little bit. So there is a spot for physical space, and I would love to hear some folks throw out assets that are sort of like in a physical space. Like what kinds of assets would you say?
I've got one.
right there. Yeah. Well, actually, let's see if they can provide some here. But also, Shannon, I see your COE, and absolutely, you're right. Oh, did you already type it? All right, sorry. Community
So
hall?
I live in a rural environment and we have community halls, like community
Oh,
space.
like town halls kind of thing,
Like,
right? Yeah.
well, sort of.
Oh,
It's
no, but it's not. It's not. That's right. Sorry.
right.
Okay.
It's an actual space, a building where we can rent or go to or do things and meet and
Yeah, that makes
Mm.
sense. So what other, I mean, what other kinds of physical resources could, you know, add or physical assets, as it were, and I'm thinking like spatially, might you sort of want to factor into your thinking? Thank you, Tichelle. Absolutely. Elementary school classrooms, right? Elementary are absolutely, and I mean, let's face it, I think it's fairly common knowledge, right? That the idea that one of the things that makes adult schools so appealing is their proximity and association with the schools where their children attend. And so church meeting halls, absolutely, churches, so important, especially if your community has you know, ethnic sort of enclaves, right? Absolutely, this because and this is also another way to engage different populations in an effort like this. But that's really good. Community centers, absolutely. What else here? Tichelle's killing it here. Can we get someone who isn't? There we go. There we go. Yeah, AJCC. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I like that. That's exactly right, Anne. So just to say this, so Marianne points out that partnerships co-located at AJCC, right? So that is both an association, but it's also location, right? Because they can be spread out, and that is a resource where you can put, you know, put courses, right? Put programs. Anne mentions that, you know, her district is very urban and they want to make sure that physical spaces are in the right geographic locations. Absolutely. So like some of the considerations for those we've identified, but in some ways then, how would you go about making those decisions? And so like to that, what do you need to know about a physical space geographically? Like what would, I guess, what criteria, I suppose, what would inform that? What proximity to what? I realize that's a lot, but community colleges, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
well, I have a thought too. We're talking physical space in the sense of what we know of, you know, being physical, but there's also the space, you know, as we learned post-COVID, of the online, the virtual space that we meet virtually, but still using it as a physical kind of thing.
I think that's great. I would put that under physical space too. You know, a couple other, so like thinking more about what Anne had in here, you know, I might also suggest this. So, right, I mean, transportation is a huge challenge for adult learners, right? And so physical assets, right, might be bus stops, right? Subway stops. It could also be childcare is another one. Proximity to childcare center, right? And that would be both childcare as such and other sorts of child support services, right? Proximity to those social service providers, right? All of those can have like inform that geographic placement, right? Or context, right? Within which you will, you know, be serving the community. So, okay, we've got about 15 minutes here. Did we get something in everything?
No, we didn't talk about local economy, although, you know, we pointed out that these can cross categories, right? And this is why it's a wheel here for my community, these cross categories. So we mentioned employers here, right? And the
Yes.
importance of that. What we mentioned workforce development boards.
And you know, one of the things I want to mention here is like we're talking about this in broad strokes, but for you, this could actually be a lot more concrete, right? Right off the bat. So it's like local economy. If you know who are, you know, like unions, right? If you know the union, right, then they would be a direct, you know, you could put them straight in there, right? And so and I would also strongly recommend engaging with unions. Any of you are considering pre-apprenticeships or apprenticeships, you have to talk to the unions. And I wouldn't even endeavor starting a new one unless you've engaged with folks who've done it on the union side because they're good at it. And they also have deep insight into what the regional needs are for some of the occupations adult schools train for. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, and so we've got advisory committees. Absolutely. The advisory committees are a wonderful source. In fact, they're wildly underutilized, right? All of you, no doubt, experience this thing where it's like, we have curriculum, we need people to tell us it's okay. You invite them, you give them snacks, they sign off, you know, and then you try to be as light touch as humanly possible, so as to keep them engaged and all of that. But in reality, some of the most effective regional advisory type boards, CTE advisory boards that I've seen actually require quite a lot from those participants. And this is a way to sort of expand their engagement, but also their level of influence and investment, right? One of the things I recommend around that always is, you know what? Everybody on your advisory committee should have an opportunity to meet the students. You need to get them on campus. And the instant you do that, you will find that they are so keen on doing more that, you know, the world of possibilities opens up. But anyway,
Greg, I'm sorry, may I interject for something that was in the chat that I would love to unpack a little bit more?
yeah, of course, yes.
Okay, so it's what we were just talking about with Anne asking where might advisory groups fit. It's a great question. Like what was talked about, CTE advisory committees. I wrote in the chat that I would actually put them under individuals and I would name them. I would actually name them.
That's
Just to
good.
Greg's point, it's underutilized, right? And I find that once you finalize an asset map, you really should be sharing it widely with your partners. And how powerful is it for them that they see their name as an asset to the work you do, right? It is truly, don't put it on there unless it is something that you know is you can tap into, but it is powerful, not just to say our advisory committee, right? It's like it's like the list of folks that you list the advisory committee in particular, so CTE advisory committee, and then you list the members by name.
I love that. Yeah, that's really helpful. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes here.
I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint because we had a discussion time. So give me 1 second. Please bear with me. I'm going to close this. Yes, okay. And I'm going to do this. Okay, here we are. All right. But first of all, do we have any other questions before we get into the general discussion? Because I wanted to get us back to our main question that we had at the start of this, but pausing because I can't see the chat, Tran and Greg. Are there any other questions?
There was one thing I wanted to highlight that Tishelle asked. So she asked, well, the document we worked on will be made available. And so I guess that is a question to answer. Alternatively, or both maybe, I know that there are some examples of completed ones that could help. But yeah, so just wanted to let you know she raised that and defer to you on how best to answer it.
Great. And Tishelle, we'll figure out a way to do something. Maybe we're going to summarize it. You know, the actual template itself is available in the resources. It's part of a guide that we chose. And we can talk about maybe with Kate about creating perhaps something in the future. All right. So let's revisit this one question that we had here. How can you see community asset mapping serving as a resource for your adult education programming and planning? We really want to open this up, but I want to add to it. It's not only how can you see it, but we're here to learn from each other. So if you have done it, how have you done it so that we can learn together? And don't be shy, just come right off mute.
Emma, you've been awfully quiet. Like, and I know that you're not quiet. What about you? What is your experience, Ben? Are you there?
I'm here. It's just that I'm plugged into a docking station at work, so I don't know how good my sound quality will be.
Sound great.
Sound
Yeah.
good? Okay. I don't have a picture though. I'm gonna say I really like the template. I think it starts a great conversation. Especially because there's always a lot of agencies and a lot of organizations that are constantly in flux anywhere. So this is a great opportunity to do that like snapshot of who is there now, who are we in the sandbox with, playing nice with, and who's the ones we still need to, connect with. So I really like the template. I did some screenshots of it, but I hope you do share that with us. I think that we'll definitely use something like that to get the dialogue going. I know Diana's giving me a thumbs up because Diana's come to some of our planning sessions, and even at our annual plan, we had the libraries come in and we try to reach out to as many different individuals in the community that are offering services to adults, and how do we support them and then transition them between the different services that they need. So I really like the template. I feel it's a great start. And once you put it down on paper, then it shows you, who are we already 100% working well with, but who's the ones that we're not working well with. And not because they don't want to or we don't want to, it's just sometimes we haven't found that commonality.
Right.
So the 3-year plan is I think always a great opportunity to be able to revisit those partnerships you do have, but the ones you don't have are the ones that really stand out. And we say, how do we work better with them? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so now all of you know why I asked Emma to speak to this, right? Because she killed it. Thank you so much, Emma.
You're welcome. And I love listening to your webinars. I learn a lot. Maybe that's why I'm quiet, because I'm taking it all in going, how do I fit this into when we start our planning sessions? How do we work this part into it? Because I really like I said, your template. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it really helps a structured approach to how to partner better in the community.
We're so glad. Yeah, thank you, Emma.
And I know Myra's on the webinar, and it's not surprising to see which consortia leads are here, but I know a number that we really need to get engaged with this. Maybe we could add this into some of that quality consortium self-assessment.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot what the initials stand for anymore, the program quality self-assessment. Because I think like listening to Emma, if you were to have each one of your agencies within the consortia, each one of the members complete that, you might get a much broader list.
Yeah. I love that idea. It is an assessment, right? But it becomes sort of a self-reflection tool in and of itself, where you can identify what Emma noted, where are things working well? Where might they need a bit more support or connections, and drawing those. And thank you, Emma, for also mentioning libraries. I can't believe we didn't mention that earlier, but yeah, that the libraries are so important.
Yeah, and there are a couple comments in chat that I wanted to highlight. So Shannon, I think I love what you just said here. So she indicated, right, that she lives that her community is rural, right? And so there is, in particularly rural areas, asset mapping, I think, is especially an especially valuable tool, because when the resources are more diffuse, it's not always going to be the case that everyone is as knowledgeable of them as you might think, right? And so I love that, and the idea of having the smaller one, smaller communities do them, and then maybe coming together and working the other direction. I think that could be really valuable.
And Greg, I forwarded to the resource slide since we're talking about resources and people are kind of sharing their ideas and sharing the love of having a template. So these are some of the ones that we covered. This is where the template we use today came from. It's the professional standard for educational leaders. It came from there. It mentions, it talks about a library. It says, your library is involved in this, but you can adapt this. And also when you go, you mentioned this earlier, Greg, when you go in the CAPE 3-year planning guide, here's a link for that. But they do have a whole resource page in there that gives a lot on asset mapping. There was the webinar that happened, you mentioned it in 2018. Asset mapping does not get old. It is it is fantastic. The webinar was great too. And there are additional resources in that. So the slides are here for you also.
That's interesting. I'd be really curious to hear more at another time about what you're saying, Carla, about Carrick's asset map focusing more on students. That is both, I really like the thought of that. I'm super curious to learn more, but again, at a different time. Or if you have it documented, it'd be lovely to see it if you wanted to share it. But don't feel obligated.
Great. Well, we're coming very close to time. I think we have just about 2 more minutes. I would love for us to continue the discussion. If you're looking for one-on-one support with any of this, feel free to reach us. We are coming to the end of our webinar session on asset mapping. Doesn't mean we won't do any more in the future, so let us know. You can contact us for any support. And I'm going to be turning it over to Holly because there is an evaluation that we do and we look at. Holly's team does it. If you're interested in more asset mapping, put in your kind of request in there. We do use them to help plan.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa and Tran and Greg. Thank you so much for presenting with us this morning. This was a great continuation from a couple of days ago. Very, very informative for the field and for myself. In the chat, I have dropped a couple of links. The first one is for the evaluation. Please do give us your feedback. We share that with the presenters and we use that to form our professional development as we go forward. We do also use the evaluations received to help determine remediation and which sessions are remediated. Below that, you'll see a link for our upcoming events. WestEd does have another event with us, August 29th. Accelerated learning approaches, continued adult ed dual enrollment. So if you have not had a chance to do so, you can register with that link. You can also visit the link just above it for all upcoming events hosted by Cape Town. That is all we have. So we would like to thank everyone for spending your morning with us, and to the WestEd team again, thank you very much. And I hope everyone enjoys your Friday.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Here.
I'm sorry, just 1 second. Something popped up. Okay, now I'm going to end it. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye, all. Thank you.